Good morning, everyone. Day one, RSA 2025, the morning. Excited to be here. I think it's been a good start. Everybody seems perfectly caffeinated right before lunch, so we'll jump into the fascinating world of risk management. We're going to talk through a few things today. The traditional risk mindset, what we've come to believe about risk management, embracing uncertainty and thinking like an attacker, not just as a defender, not as just preventative, playing offense, shifting that mindset to being proactive, to building resiliency. We're going to have a little bit of a winding road through risk and tools and techniques and process and vulnerability management. And then I'll leave you with some ideas for practical application going forward. So everybody ready for just an exciting talk about risk management right before lunch? All right, buckle up and let's go. One of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you think you know for sure that just ain't so." And in cybersecurity, we always focus on, especially in risk, we always focus on what we don't know, but we don't think if what we think we know for sure just isn't right, because we never take the time to validate that opinion. We continue to rinse and repeat it. When we talk about traditional risk, I'll give you a little bit of my background. I'm not going to spend 50 minutes talking about myself. Nobody wants that. But I came into cyber from the business side. So I started my career in business operations. I moved into finance. I know. I then was in project management, data governance, and then I came into cyber and risk from the operational risk side. So I have a frame of reference that connects the dots between technical and business and customer. So how we think about risk. It's always been reactive. It's never been what's around the corner, it's what we have always saw. We're trying to prevent and defend, working with cyber teams, working with vendors, rarely with the business, they just kind of get in the way. It's very much tool driven. I had a boss one time, former Army Ranger, and he gave me a great piece of advice, and I think it works in cyber, in risk, and in life. You should never be controlled by a tool, ever. You should never let technology dictate what your process is. Should be vice versa. We'll talk about that. And color-coded risk levels. We're familiar with the red, yellow, green. Everybody familiar with the red, yellow, green? There's not a lot of context to it. And I don't want to sound like I'm throwing stones, but having done numerous assessments and coming off with, oh, you're green today. What's the context for that? What does it mean? It's like bringing crayons to a math test. People are looking for financial impact on the business side, or if you communicate to the board, but we're giving them green, right? All the while, the attack surface changes regularly, the attackers get more sophisticated, and we maintain what we've always done. We spend a lot of money on cybersecurity. We spend a lot of money on cyber risk. Gartner's projecting this year we're going to be over 200 billion globally. Does that mean that we have more protection, or does it mean that we just spend a lot of money, or somewhere in the middle? Well, the fact is, better technology does not always equal better security. It doesn't necessarily minimize risk. For a few reasons. No company has the resources to fix everything. We can't patch every vulnerability. We can't address every risk in the risk register. We can't plug every hole. It's impossible. Plus, you add on top of that companies, many of them, regardless of vertical, have an affinity of, shall we say, vintage technology and vintage assets, unsupported operating systems. You know, I see a lot of heads shaking. You've seen it, you've lived it. Many companies, they don't even know what they have, where it is, and who's using it. Right? You go through some M&A activity, integrations, old applications run off, new ones are pulled on. You lose sight of everything. That creates blind spots. We'll talk about those. And let's face it, security teams have not historically been the best at staying connected to the business. Business was business, security was an IT thing. And a lot of times what that's created is a gap that security teams are oblivious to how the business actually runs and what tools are used to support the mission of the business. So that leaves a fundamental question. If the cybersecurity and risk teams don't know the details of how the business runs and what's critical to that business, how do we know that what we're protecting is the right thing? So we have to embrace uncertainty. Anthony Bourdain had a phrase, I think it was also a tattoo, that said, "Be certain of nothing." And I think that's a very good operating mechanism for risk and security in general. So when we're assessing risk, we look at a lot of data points. And how many people have heard the concept that measuring risk, cybersecurity, it's a game. It's a game of chess. You're trying to outmaneuver the adversary. You're trying to move the pieces to the right position on the board, right? We use trends. We look at threat and vulnerability reports. We look at breach assessments or annual breach reports, which are backward looking, but they do provide a lot of good data, and previous assessments. When we do risk assessments annually, as many companies do, how do we know that we've included the right information? How do we know that we looked at them from an unbiased way? The worst thing we can do when we assess something or make a decision about a risk is by saying, we've always done it that way. We know how this is, as if the business environment is static, which it's not. So previous assessments are a great data point, but now when you think about those, does it really seem like we're playing chess? If you've played chess, you know it's a game of nearly perfect information. There's very little luck involved. The pawn can't become the piece of supreme awesomeness. You can't just have another queen appear. Very little is unknown other than maybe your opponent's skill level, right? So do you think we're playing chess when we're looking at risk? No, we're playing poker. We're playing poker because we only know the cards that we have, and depending on where we are in the game, we may only know 3 cards in front. We don't know the skill of anybody across the table from us or our adversary. We don't know what they know. We can guess what we think they know, but we don't really know. We certainly don't know what cards they have, and we don't know if they're bluffing. So how does this relate back to cyber risk? Well, the first question when you see this slide is, why is there an angry koala in a hoodie? And I'll tell you because 2 reasons. One, dogs playing poker, it just didn't work on a slide, just being honest. And there's only so many times you can use the guy in the hoodie with the digital rain, right? We've all seen that ad nauseum. But we have to embrace uncertainty like a poker player. And how do we do that? By looking at how we're making our decisions. Decisions are not necessarily good nor bad. It's the process that we went through to reach that decision is what we should focus on. It's not the outcome, it's the process. A great process can still lend what's called a bad decision. But as long as your process is sound and you're weighing different factors, you can see repeatable elements in that process which will change over time as you start to incorporate different elements. So how do we do that? Let's start by measuring decision quality. What hidden information is out there in our business? What do we know, and I mean really know? Not that we think we know, but what do we really know? Previous decisions, just like previous assessments, are they reliable? Do we know what went into the thought process, how we reached them? Was it because it was in a hurry and we needed to get it done? Was it quarter end? Was it nearing the end of the year and we realized, wow, we've only done half of our risk assessments? Scenario planning. Have we weighed different outcomes, or do we think about things just, this is how it's been, this is how it is, this is how it's done? Finding solutions versus finding obstacles. I like this one. We've all worked with different groups, different people, where they will find amazing solutions to complex problems. They will look at things very creatively, and they will, even if it's something that is a temporary solution that requires continuous improvement, they will find something. And I don't know about you, but I get energized by people like that because it's just the creative thinking, the creative problem solving. However, we've also run into the people that find obstacles where there should be a solution. It's kind of like the same types of people that find a problem to solve versus just solutioning. So finding obstacles also goes into the we've always done it this way. So that those words paralyze you from critical thought. It doesn't allow you to go beyond that set of beliefs and challenge it. It forces you to just stay in your lane. And that goes into adaptation. Are we flexible? Are we rigid? Are we willing to try new ideas from outside sources, from interesting sources, from sources outside of our industry? I work in healthcare, and I'll tell you, I look at all industries, from finance to energy, across the board, for ideas and things that I can pick and use and adapt for my needs. And I hope other people do that with healthcare. So the danger of relying on solely on past performance, and I think I saw this guy on the highway coming from the airport yesterday, but it's like driving forward, looking in the rearview mirror. So you're going forward, but you're looking like this and hoping you don't fall down the stairs. So past successes, we really like success, don't we? Past successes really, that gets us going. We won that one. We don't learn from them, though, that they may not repeat. Failures, maybe we learn from, maybe not. I'll give you an example. If you rely solely on past performance to determine future course of action, right, you can go down a bad hole, if you will, simply because it's unreliable. So does anybody play golf in here at all? Okay. There's a few people that do, a few people that don't want to admit it, but that's okay. The first time you played golf and you came up to a par 3, and this, I promise this will be meaningful to people even if you don't play golf. Par 3, short hole, you tee off, beautiful shot, right on line, hits, rolls, bounces in the cup. Hole in one, right? So that was the 4th hole. Now on the 8th hole, you have a par 3 again. If I rely solely on my past experience, what am I expecting on the 8th hole? A hole in one. What's the likelihood of me getting a hole in one? Exactly. And that's even from the first time, really. And there's a lot of luck that comes in with that, just like in risk. You need a lot of luck, you need a lot of preparation, and good quality decisions. The past is a data point, but is not your only data point. We have to think like an attacker, and I know I didn't do digital rain, I did light bulbs and crazy things. But what do we always hear when we hear examples of ransomware or breaches or attacks? They were in our network. They knew what we had was. We need to know our business better than they do. And how you do that is by starting to look at the knowns and the unknowns. When I said earlier about what do you really know, what are your blind spots? And I mean really your blind spots. What about browser extensions? What about security cameras? What about printers that I absolutely hate? What about the digital landfill, also known as shared drives? Right? Those are some blind spots. Go beyond vulnerabilities. We all do vulnerability scans. We all see vulnerability reports. but go beyond those. Telecom, that's another one. Asset inventories. We've been preaching this forever. Asset inventories are what? The top 2 CIS controls for a reason. Yet, if we look at our own organizations, if we look across different industries, if we talk to some of the smartest people in cybersecurity, they're all in this room. I'm guessing because you all came to my session. But if we talk to the smartest people in cybersecurity, they're going to tell you what? That asset inventories, there's merely lesser degrees of bad and not best in class, right? But we have to become world class in that. That leads us to understanding our critical infrastructure, our critical assets. Where are they? What helps our business function? What's important to our board? What's important to carry out the strategic initiatives of our company? And in some industries, you're impacting your community as well, like in healthcare, or like in water purification, or like in energy. And then assessing previous methods, but assigning a financial impact to that. If something goes boom, how much does it cost? The board may not understand hardcore technical jargon, but they understand that if a site that generates $1 million a day, whether it be an assembly line, a warehouse, logistics, whatever, if that generates $1 million a day and it's down for 30 days, they lost a very public $30 million. They will understand that every day of the week. So make it relevant to them. And you can do that by just deconstructing previous attacks and methods. What attackers are targeting your industry? What attackers are targeting your region, your country, right? What are they doing? What CVEs are they exploiting? How are they getting in? So use data to think like an attacker. Make strategic bets. A great book that I read that actually, as I was on a plane last year, formed the thesis of this talk was Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. It's a quick read, but it's a great book. But thinking in terms of strategic bets. We all make outlandish claims. We all have strong beliefs, right? It could be even from when you were a kid, right? Think of when you'd bet your friends that you could jump over 6 kids on your bike, or that you could jump, off the porch, or like Uncle Rico and Napoleon Dynamite, that you could throw a football over the mountain. God, I hope you saw that movie, otherwise that was wasted. But as soon as someone says, how much you want to bet? Ooh, now our confidence level shrinks a little. We're not so sure. Before someone said want to bet, we were at 100%. It was going to happen. It was like the sun setting. But then they said want to bet. Now we're not so sure. Now maybe it's 60% confidence. And then if they threw some cash on there, or double or nothing, ooh, now our 100% became 10%. We're not so sure anymore. But you can use that concept of thinking in bets to build scenarios. As you're building scenarios for your risk program and what potential outcomes can happen, you can start to say, I'm 60% confident of this. I'm 40% confident of this. Or I'm 80% confident of that. It's not perfect, but it helps you evaluate different outcomes. And that's where all those sources of data now become very useful tools. And done properly, you're spending in the right areas, your controls are being built up in the right areas, that in essence you're starting to build a moat around your critical infrastructure. Doesn't mean you don't look at everything else, but you're building a moat around your critical infrastructure. Evaluating different outcomes. Nobody likes to think about failure, right? But it happened. And it could just be bad, dumb luck. It doesn't mean that we did something wrong. But what happens if we fail? Well, that's where a pre-mortem comes in. Has anybody done a pre-mortem? I've done them with my teams, and I have to tell you, it's a little weird the first few times when You're deploying a new system or you're rolling something new out and you're already talking about how it failed and what went sideways and why everybody's mad and how your funding got pulled and all of that stuff. But it's very useful. It's very educational in how you conduct a deployment, how you roll out a process, how you think about risk and in placing your bets. And what factors just bluntly are outside of control? If they're outside of your control, by definition, that's bad luck, or that's good luck. You just happen to be looking where the attacker was stalking. Yay us, right? But that isn't the norm, and we have to account for that. And you do that by looking at your threat intel, looking at industry and vendor data. Go outside your industry, as I said earlier. Build attacker profiles. They don't have to be hardcore, pages long, a little Excel file with here's the CVEs, here's the attacker, here's what they've done in the past. And again, it all goes back to your crown jewels. You'll hear me say this numerous times. So now, let's shift to playing offense. How do we play offense? We don't often think about playing offense with risk management. We really don't think about playing offense with vulnerability management. We only talk about playing offense when it comes to offensive operations and red teaming, historically. But I'm going to show you how. So the great Stoic philosopher Mike Tyson gave us this quote: "Everyone has a plan until they've been punched in the face." We all get punched in the face. And if we haven't, we will. It's not about getting punched in the face. It's not about getting knocked down. It's about how fast can you get back up. How fast, that's a measure of your resiliency. If you can get back up quickly, the punch loses its effectiveness. So we do that by changing our mindset, changing our frame of reference, and start to connect the dots. It's all pieces of a puzzle. It's not a one thing. It's not a technology solves this or will detect this. You have to know things. And again, you don't have to go down into the weeds, into the dirt to know every nuance. But you have to have more than surface level details to start telling you what's critical to the business. Because if you can start walking the line between business process, strategic goals, and critical assets, that informs your protection strategy. That informs what you focus on from a risk perspective. That informs your focus. So what risks does your organization face beyond those that are the obvious? It goes back to your blind spots. Because if I'm an attacker, and this thinking like an attacker, I'm not going to go after what everybody's looking at. I'm going to go after the things that no one's looking at. It's kind of like a burglar at home. If you have an alarm and a dog, but your neighbor has better stuff, but they leave their door open, or you have better stuff than your neighbor, but your neighbor leaves the door open all the time, where are they going to go? The neighbor, right? It's about being harder to kill and focusing on the right things. How could a cyber attack impact our business? And that could not even be an attack. It could be an incident. It could be just downtime. What happens? You see this a lot with industrial control systems, if you're familiar with just the OT side of the house, which is part of my team, right? That's where you're going to see downtime. OT systems operate in the real world where IT systems are in the digital world. So when you have nobody cares about an industrial control system until the HVAC doesn't work on a hot day, right? But that can impact your business because that's the difference between, are we up and running, are we having manual workarounds, or are we just down? And how long are we down? Is the executive team engaged? Do they know what risks are to the business in their terms and how their goals, their initiatives can be impacted by the realization of a cyber risk? Connecting those dots for them is critical. Then going into investment. It's not about spending money to spend money. because Joe from ABC Tech, takes us out to good dinners. It's about having the perspective of knowing the requirements and the problem you're trying to solve before you invest in a technology solution that helps support that process and those requirements. And then going into current state, when you look long and hard at what your company does and your current controls, your current environment, are the controls enough? Do we have privilege escalation, or do we do quarterly access audits? I know quarterly is a little extreme, but bear with me. Right, do we know what we have? Do we know who uses it? Do we know what vendors come in and just install new gear on our guest network, and then we find it kind of accidentally? Right? Measuring that, thinking like an attacker, looking at what's effective and what's not, and then focusing on what's not. If you look too closely at the stuff which we all do it, I've done it. If you focus too closely on the things you do well, you'll be too busy not focusing on what you don't do well. And that's the ugly part of our job, what we don't do well, because it's very eye-opening. So it's an evolution. We're not going to do this overnight, and you don't have to do it, go from a 0 to 100%. So many people do that with initiatives, right? 0 to 100%, we can't get to 100% in 6 months, scrap it, throw it away, we're done. When 0 to 10%, 10% is still better than 0, right? 15% is better than 10, that incremental improvement. We can't, as the takeaway says, we can't continue to operate as status quo while attackers evolve. Not just their techniques, but the tools that they have and how they're coming after us. So to evolve to offense and building resiliency, we have to be leadership driven. And I'm not talking executive buy-in, I'm not talking board, I'm talking CISOs, I'm talking directors, I'm talking managers. They all have to contribute to the vision, to the strategy. Where do we want to go? What's coming around the corner? If you're not forward thinking, you're living in the past and something bad is going to happen, and you're not going to be able to control it because it's coming around the corner. It's not back there. Be strategic and execution focused. You can't execute on a strategy that doesn't exist. And strategy without execution is delusion. It looks nice on a PowerPoint, but you're not doing anything with it. And you start building resiliency by looking at your process, looking at what you do, looking at how you communicate, build awareness, and almost do the opposite of what we've historically done. How we do that? We live at the intersection of improve and control. Improve and invent. We have to invent the processes that we need in the future, not just what we've always done in the past. While we improve what we've done in the past, while we improve the controls, while we improve awareness, make security relevant, make risk relevant. I don't mean to oversimplify, but a cyber incident, right, or exploitation of a vulnerability is really only the materialized real-world impact of a realized risk. It happened in real life, as opposed to on a spreadsheet. So, tactically, let's start looking at where our critical assets reside. I think I've said that like 5 times now. You're probably sick of it. But it's true. If we don't know the critical infrastructure, we can't possibly protect it because we don't know it is. But rest assured, if an attacker knows your business better than you do as a defender, they will find it. Document the system and process relationships, the touch points. What connects to those systems? What processes are leveraged, or what processes rely on them, excuse me. What do we do with these systems and who's using them? Process. Build processes, document processes, keep them simple. Don't use 12 steps if 6 will do. There's no awards for 15 swim lanes and 18 handoffs. There just isn't. Keep it simple, keep it focused. Simple is infinitely scalable. Simple is infinitely adaptable. Look at your critical business processes. Look at your critical systems, whether in cyber or outside of it, and start looking at ways you can reduce downtime. What version are we running? Right? Are we at N-1, N-2, or are we really vintage? And establish clear communication about risk across all departments. And I'll say this again in another slide, but I'm going to say it here. You have to make sure they know the what, the so what, and the now what. If they don't know what you're doing, why they should care, and what you're going to do about it, it's over. They're going to lose interest. And I've seen that happen because it's happened to me, where when I was learning and I wasn't communicating well and I was focused on the technical details or I was focusing on the risk score, that was a nice, thanks for coming, appreciate the data, until you can make it relevant. The basics. I talked earlier about being world-class in the basics. The basics are boring. Nobody likes to talk about the basics. The basics won't get you a new sale. The basics won't land you a $2 million 3-year agreement on a new system. But the basics are how we learn our business better than the attacker. And it starts by asset identification, which I think has been said at this conference and many others for the last 5 years ad nauseum, right? But let's be world-class. There's no reason we have to accept where we're at. Asset criticality, start racking and stacking once you know. And here's the thing about asset identification. Remember I said earlier about we try to go from 0 to 100, and when we can't get to 100, we stop. It doesn't matter where we are, we just stop. Don't try to identify everything right out of the gate. Maybe start with your tier 1, tier 0. However you've defined it in your business from a DR perspective, start there. Start mapping all of the codependencies. Start mapping what it touches. How critical is it to the business? If it's tier 1, from a DR perspective, it probably is really critical. That gets people's attention. Ownership. Asset inventory is important, but ownership is also important. Who owns it? Or do you have like 5 people going like this? And every time you try to track them down, who's ever opened a ticket, assigned it to someone, and then they're like, oh, well, that isn't me. You go on this wild goose chase, only to have it come back to that person and say, oh yeah, I call it something else. And patching and maintenance. This is just part of life cycle. And again, it's not going to be world-class overnight, but you build it over time. Continuous improvement, maintain, improve, invent, repeat. So that brings us on our journey to vulnerability management. This is a demented game of whack-a-mole in most companies until you get to a point where you want to hit yourself in the head with the mallet, like our friend here, where there's millions of vulnerabilities every month, and you may say, what does vulnerability management have to do with risk? Well, it is the realization of risk, where if you have vulnerabilities that continue to backlog month after month after month, right, you now have an accumulation of risk, which can be realized. In traditional vulnerability management, we do what? Monthly scan, report, maybe open some tickets, Microsoft Patch Tuesday, rinse and repeat, right? There's not a lot of analysis that always goes on. But I say we should rethink it. Now, some of this is common sense. Some of this you've heard before. Some of this you're going to say, like, yeah, Chris, we know. But start with exploitation. A CVSS 10, and I learned this from the OT world. This was a learning experience for me. In the OT world, less than 4% of vulnerabilities actually have to be patched. And the reason for that is because they're not all exploitable. Or to exploit them, you have to physically be there, right? Well, why can't we use that same logic in the IT space? We've always taken it as gospel that if it's a 10, first out the door. And now I'm not telling you to not patch 10s, and I'm not telling you to not go after 0 days. I don't want that on my conscience. But if everybody's over here on the 10 that isn't exploitable, or where exploitation is theoretical, that was one that I read in a briefing, you're wasting your time. Because the attacker's over here on the 5 that a 15-year-old could exploit, right? And they know the easy way in, right? So legacy, if you've gone through mergers and acquisitions, what stuff is out there, right? Do you know? There's another blind spot. Weakened default credentials, another blind spot. An easy way in, especially if they're external facing. Policy enforcement, and again, here's another opportunity for pre-mortems. Context is everything. I said it before, not every vulnerability, critical vulnerability needs to be patched at warp speed. But how easy is it to exploit? What does a bad day look like? How much do we lose? And what breaks? So now how do you apply this? Like, yeah, this was an awesome talk before lunch on day 1, but how do I apply this? Well, we're going to build a winning hand. I couldn't let go of the poker analogy just quite yet. But here we go. So right away, conduct a baseline assessment. And be brutal, be honest, be realistic of your entire program or just your risk program, your vulnerability program. You pick. But make it brutal, make it honest. Identify blind spots. Start with weakened default credentials. I strongly recommend that, as well as your vintage equipment, which sometimes we can't do anything. And then build a model to assess financial impact of a realized risk. It doesn't have to be all hardcore, fair, or anything like that. It could be in a spreadsheet. It can be annual loss expectancy. It can be pretty basic. It can be tied to what does the assembly line, the site, the manufacturer, the whatever, insert business here generate in a day, week, month, and now what does that translate into loss for downtime? Then within 90 days, and I'm not saying to have this complete in 90 days, but just food for thought from a strategic perspective, is start to map critical assets and infrastructure. Start to look at what your data paths are, dependencies, what you know and what you don't know. Document your asset. You don't have to do them all, but just the critical ones, and who maintains the life cycle throughout it. Document patching scenarios, document patching schedules. You'd be amazed at what you learn when you talk to patching teams. You think they're patching monthly, they're patching 45 days, and then you're wondering why your patch numbers don't look quite right or your SLA is high. And then build new operating mechanisms that establish open lines of communication, not just with executives, but with the people in the business. I've always said that if you talk to an executive, you're going to get told what they think happens. If you talk to the director or frontline manager, they're going to tell you what should happen. And when you talk to the people who do the work, they're going to tell you exactly what does happen. And it's a treasure trove of information. Lastly, I'm going to leave you with just a couple of takeaways, is that balance progress over perfection. You're not talking about going 0 to 100. Incremental improvement, consistently done over time, beats the moonshot every time. Stay connected with the business. And lastly, be certain of nothing. Thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciated you seeing me. Enjoy the rest of the conference.